Hello, and thank you for joining today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar titled Taking the First Step, Why, Verify, and What to Expect, sponsored by LRQA in partnership with Ingredion and Uber. My name is Jessica Hunt, and I'm the Director of Live Events for E&E Leader. I am going to apologize if you hear either of my dogs barking during today's event. Hopefully, they will not go off while I'm speaking. But again, I apologize in advance. I think we're probably all used to this by now. I do want to say we appreciate everybody joining us live today, and a large thank you in advance to those who will be watching this on demand. Before I hand the presentation over to the speakers today, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you experience any technical difficulties during the event, please utilize the Q&A widget, which is open below the video as well as the presentation slides. If you have any issues at all, please send me a message. We are going to be having a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's discussion. So please submit questions over the next 40 to 45 minutes or so. We will do our best to answer as many as we can before the event concludes today. And now for our speakers. They are going to talk a little bit about themselves, and we are so thrilled to have three experts on with us this afternoon. So without further ado, Brian, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Nash. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Sustainability for a company called Ingredion. We're a business-to-business ingredient manufacturer, and we supply mostly nature-based ingredients to the food and beverage space. So about 85% of our business is food and beverage, and then beyond that, things like industrial and bioplastics. Anyway, I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher Patterson. I am the Global Sustainability Program Manager here at Uber. My focus is around our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So everything that happens in our real estate or in our internal operations. I also expand to Scope 3 in terms of employee travel. And we're expanding into areas like waste or emissions from supply chains, XYZ. I'd say that the rides, delivery, and freight portions of our business make up majority of our emissions. And so I'll be sticking pretty closely to Scope 1 and 2, but we'll have some touch points on verification around what we've been able to record from a Scope 3 use of products sold perspective, which is where our product emissions lie on. Excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Markoff, and I manage LRQA's technical programs for climate change and sustainability services in the Americas, including assessment, validation, verification, and consulting. And I also continue to deliver validation and verification services for a number of our key clients. So, a little bit about LRQA. We're a leading global assurance provider bringing together unrivaled expertise in certification, brand assurance, cybersecurity, inspection, and training. Our sector specialists apply extensive carbon management expertise to demonstrate compliance and accurately verify your carbon emissions, helping to reduce the footprint of your organization and its wider supply chain. We're proud to combine strong values, decades of experience in risk management, and a keen focus on the future to better support our clients as they build safer, more secure, and sustainable businesses. So in order to help tee up the discussion with our panelists, I'm going to go over some of the key drivers of verification. So there's the old adage, you can only manage what you measure. And it's a third-party verification of your carbon data and impact that help a company manage and report accurate information and give you and your stakeholders confidence that you're fit for purpose and ready to set net zero targets and put into action some policies to achieve those targets. With the patchwork of regulatory programs around the world, most of them require reporting at the facility level or the asset level. What continues to be the main driver for corporate reporting are a company's stakeholders. And these are both investors from the top down who want to manage their risk when choosing which companies to invest in, as well as consumers/customers from the bottom up who want to support companies that they feel are doing the right thing through their purchase decisions. And we've got ESG ratings agencies and NGO scoring platforms, such as the CDP. The CDP sends out a questionnaire every year to hundreds of companies. And in order for those companies to score well in the CDP index, they need to comprehensively complete the questionnaire. And in order to be able to get more points and potentially make it onto the A list at the CDP, they also are required to complete third-party verification. And so the next couple here are interrelated. As stakeholders have been becoming more informed over the years, they're really starting to drive companies to go beyond just reporting their direct Scope 1 and energy indirect Scope 2 emissions, and are incentivizing companies to bring in more of the complete upstream and downstream life cycle impacts of their operations. These are what we refer to as Scope 3 carbon emissions. The purpose here is to get a real big picture of the impact of an organization and to avoid outsourcing to contractors some of their actual impact. And then just also, like I said, to get the full picture. You can see how this move towards more Scope 3 is part of what's driving more carbon reporting up and down supply chains as well. Next up here, after the Paris Agreement was ratified by the United Nations in 2016, we really start to see the financial community come online more as big change makers within the carbon impact space. And so in December 2020, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative was launched. Currently, there's 220 asset managers who are signatories, and the total assets under management for these signatories is a big $57 trillion, which is about half of all of the assets under management globally. And these are the firms that run our 401ks and endowments for universities, and they're also the firms that decide what companies make it into mutual funds and index funds. And so in order for these companies to be a part of the plan for these asset managers, the asset managers are requiring companies to set net zero targets and to put policies in place to demonstrate that they're on a path to meet those targets. So Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, in his 2021 letter to CEOs, stated that companies with better ESG profiles are performing better than their peers, enjoying a sustainability premium. And he annually has been sending out a letter to CEOs, which has been very forthright in regards to driving change within the space of carbon management. And so it's exciting that we're now finding ourselves in the situation where in the past, taking action in the space of carbon was seen as an expense and a real hit to the bottom line for a lot of companies. Now we're seeing that taking action is becoming a real revenue growth model for organizations. So the last one on the list here, and the more recent one, and potentially one of the biggest drivers going forward, in early 2021, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission started putting out signals to the market that they're going to be putting in place policies to require third-party assurance of non-financial reporting with regards to carbon impacts of corporations. And so they've been putting out announcements over the year, and we're expecting by either the end of this year or at the latest early 2022 to see more clarity being rolled out from the SEC in this regard. So keep an eye on this space. So now I'd like to hand it off to Jessica So she's up our first polling question, which will then lead to our panel discussion.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for giving us an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. If you have been on webinars in the past, this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm really excited about the way this webinar is going. So we're going to have a few poll questions during the event, and then you guys are going to have an opportunity to hear from all three of these experts in conversation. So at any time something they say triggers a question, please submit it in the Q&A widget so we can try to get to it before we conclude today's event. So first poll question. Where is your organization in the verification journey of measuring, reporting, and verifying? Just starting, we don't measure yet, report, or verify. On our way, we currently measure and or report, but don't yet verify. We measure, report, and verify. We're going to give everybody about 20 more seconds or so to answer this, and then we're going to move on. If for some reason your slide does not advance after we advance, just refresh your screen. And I see we're getting quite a few in right now, so we'll give everybody about 10 more seconds to hit their button and submit. Alrighty. Okay, results. Seems like some are on our way. I think there's a lot of push with regulations, obviously, and compliance to be on the way. So, Derek, you want to take this one, right? See what questions. What do you take from these results? You're on mute still.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm excited to see the makeup here of, over 50% have not yet been verified. And hence, it's the topic of the webinar here indicates we've got the right community here. So hope we can, help inform you guys on the process to help give you some confidence of your next steps you're going to be taking.
And I know, Brian, you're going to take us down this journey with the first topic, but what are your thoughts on these results?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is about what I would expect to see. I think if we look over the last, probably 3 years, at least in the U.S., if you're in Europe, this is probably a little bit more farther along in your journey. But at least in the U.S. where I'm at, I'd say in the last 3 years, we've seen a lot of evolution from investors and the pressure that's coming from those investors. And so with that, we see our CFO and the financial teams kind of waking up to all this. And the first thing they want to know is what kind of data governance do we have? When we're reporting financial information or even ESG to investors, we want to make sure that there's some confidence there. And those questions, I know at least from my end, from my company, we've been seeing a lot more of those type questions in the last probably 18 months. So this is pretty close to what I would expect to see.
Okay. And Chris, what about you at Uber? Is this what you expect to see too?
Yeah, I would say so. I think there might be a fourth layer of answer to this question, which would be you are verifying, you report, you verify, but you don't capture your full scope yet. And I think that's very much where we're at in a place. And so if you were going through these answers and thinking that, just know that you're also not alone in that journey.
Fantastic. So why don't we get into this topic a little bit more? Brian is going to start us off with where is your organization in the verification journey of measuring, reporting, and verifying?
Yeah, thanks. So I would say we're very much like Chris mentioned, we're in that fourth unlisted category. So Ingredion's been issuing sustainability reports since 2010. If you happen to get your hands on one of those, you will see that it's not a very thorough report. It's more like a pamphlet on sustainability, as opposed to what we've put out recently, which is more data, more focused on what's actually substantive or material in our sustainability reporting. So in our journey, we currently, looking at our materiality matrix for sustainability, what are the things in that high quadrant? Their water, carbon emissions, or climate change, and sustainable agriculture. we're currently verifying and reporting on all of the data against our sustainability targets, but only verifying the things right now in that upper quadrant. So what I would say is that on our journey, we're looking to evolve that, probably starting with next year or the year after. How do we verify our entire report? So make sure that there's that data integrity around all the information in our sustainability report. And then I would see 2 to 4 years out, really looking at how do we enhance our data collection systems so that there's some level of verification built into them, and so that we've got a more robust and easier process that we can get verification on all of our data, whether it's reported or not.
I'd like to say, Brian, that your approach is the common approach we see with clients. And like on our poll, as people are building towards, or as companies are building towards reporting their full picture, carbon's usually where things start. This is where a lot of this whole environmental metric tracking initiative we've all been on for the last 20 years began with carbon. We've started to see clients build in other data sets to have us verify them. Like you said, they're reporting them, but they're not always confident that they have enough supporting records to be ready to have them verified, but they're working on that in the background. Then they just start, each year would kind of expand our scope with the client to include more sets of data on the way to having the whole report verified. So it's a common trajectory we see a lot of our clients on.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Derek, and maybe this segues into like where we're at Uber. But we did expand our scope from our 2020 ESG report to our 2021 ESG report. So taking a step back, we are going on our 3rd year of environmental social governance reporting. 2019 was our baseline year for our scope 1 and 2 climate data. And we had that verified for our 2020 report. We then expanded the business travel, air travel, and then we also expanded the scope 3 categories that we, not the categories themselves, but the countries in which we were calculating emissions data for in our scope 3 category 11. We were only doing the US and Canada in our 2020 report. And then for 2021, we're showing 9 different countries total, including 7 key countries in Europe. So you certainly start to expand as you get more mature in the process. This is only our 2nd year, yet we were able to expand and cover more of our portfolio. And I think this really helps with one, transparency, both internally and externally, understanding where you're at, and then what measures you need to put in place to reduce. We're all tracking towards these overall goals, right? And so your organization may have made some type of net zero goal that's maybe aligned to the Science-Based Target Initiative. So it's important to note that when you're doing those things, you need to have a certain portion of your basically your scope 3 accounted for, and so those are things that we're working more towards now. It helps drive what our strategy looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned, I know we were talking before the call about CDP reporting, and you mentioned that you guys are doing that. I know that reporting to CDP was a big initial driver for Ingredion to get our environmental data validated. I'm just curious if that was similar for you as well.
Yep, that is correct. So CDP, we submitted last year for our full scope of CDP, and then submitted this year as well. And so we wouldn't have included our environmental numbers if we didn't have them verified. We also wouldn't have included them in just our ESG report in general if we didn't have them verified. Again, the verification really offers the level of assurance in whatever level it is that you're pursuing, but it does offer some level of assurance on your data, and that's certainly needed when you're doing any type of public reporting. And you only get better over time at it, but super important. And we almost leverage the CDP as a climate registry platform so that we can track over time in that professional platform what our emissions look like.
Mm. Yeah, one of the things that we tell clients, as they're trying to determine if they're ready for verification, what we're looking for is, in order for us to verify the data, we need to see some of the records that underlie the data. So we sample and we look at the systems that are in place to measure and report, and then we look to make sure that there are records to substantiate the information that's being reported. So, electricity use, natural gas use, that stuff's pretty easy to provide records for, utility bills and the like. Where it gets more challenging, which you bring up, Chris, is when you're looking at especially Scope 3. It takes a while to get a handle on providing supporting documentation for that. But also, bills for waste and water are not always as straightforward as they are for energy. So, and then we have clients who are reporting all different things like lost time incidents in sustainability, in the social side, and spills and things along those lines. Those get a little nebulous when it comes to records as well. But just something for you all to keep in mind is, when you're going down that journey, you can just take time to make sure you've got processes in place to capture those records and keep them on file so that when you're ready to have things filed, it's a pretty straightforward process.
That all sounds great. Before we move on to our second topic, and I know we're saving our Q&A to the end, but Brian, a question did come in. If you could go over the upper quadrant again. The question is, I didn't catch what Brian said. What is the upper quadrant he mentioned that they are verifying?
Yeah, sorry. I sometimes talk fast and assume everybody's starting from the same starting point. So it's not uncommon for a company to perform a materiality assessment or a materiality matrix to figure out what are the most relevant sustainability topics. And those are usually like a 2x2 grid, in our case, a 3x3 grid. On one axis, it's showing importance to your stakeholders, and on the other axis, it's showing importance to your organization. And so what you're left with are things that are important to stakeholders, and things that are important to your organization are in that upper quadrant of either the 2x2 or the 3x3 grid. So that's what I'm referring to. The most material things under sustainability of importance to my company as well as my stakeholders are that quadrant. That's where we started with our verification.
Great. Thank you for going into some more detail there. We do have another poll question coming up, and I do want to thank the attendees who are submitting questions during today's discussion. So on to our second poll question now. What is the driving approach to verification in your organization? We're looking to provide transparency and trust in our data. Our clients require our data to be verified. Our regulators require our data to be verified, or other. And I think other could be all three of these could apply. So if all three of those apply, I would just select other. And again, we'll give everybody about 30 seconds or so to answer this poll question before we move on to the discussion. All right, let's see. So a majority of people were looking to provide transparency and trust in our data. And I know from reading many articles that we publish, as well as different reports that I see, transparency is a huge, huge thing right now in the industry, in many industries. So Chris, what's your take on this data at first glance?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense where the numbers are. If I was answering this question, I would also say to provide transparency and trust, because I think it kicks off a slew of different items. I think that each of these there's no wrong answer here. I think each of these is a correct answer, and each of these also is a factor, right? I think if we're submitting data to regulators, like we need to make sure it's verified. If we're telling our clients who are making purchasing decisions what our data is, we again need to make sure it's verified. I think that our one of our core values here at Uber is to do the right thing. I think having a level of assurance on the processes that you build internally, having that external level of assurance is super important. Most of your organizations probably also have like an internal audit team that might look through the data, and then you may build processes. Let's take scope 1 and 2 data, for example. We have utility bill collection services that collect our utility bills, and then we feed that data into an energy management tool, right? But there's still some human elements in those transitions. And so there still very much may be some errors in the data that's being transferred from system to system or from the data that's being inputted into the system. And so having that like level of assurance just basically says, hey, we took a peek under the hood and you're doing things correctly. And then oftentimes you also find, here are the errors that we found. And would you like to address them? And those errors that are found only strengthen your system going forward. And it gives you some very clear marching orders to take into the next round of reporting and how you want to perfect your internal systems. And so it's kind of like if you're just looking at something for hours and hours and hours, you're kind of only seeing it in one lens. Having a totally separate set of eyes on it will allow you to just be able to just get better data and be more transparent. So.
Brian, what's your experience? You kind of feel the same way, I'm sure. That,
I'm very well aligned with Chris on this. I mean, I think it makes sense. For me, I'd say all three of these apply to our business, but first and foremost is the transparency and trust issue. When talking about sustainability or ESG with investors, you have a few opportunities to build trust. I mean, there's a very fine line between communicating sustainability progress and greenwashing. And so there's a few ways to provide or to build trust. And first and foremost, I think on that is sharing good data. Anybody willing to share good data, I think that's a step in the right direction. And then I think telling an honest story, right? Not just talking about what you do well, but talking about where you have challenges. All companies do. And I know at Ingredion, when we started sharing where our challenges were in things like human rights, here are the most common found issues in auditing our plants. I know there's a lot of skepticism inside our company about doing that. But when we started doing that, our stakeholders, in particular our customers, started reaching out to us saying, we've been working on the same things. How do we work together? And that's led to a lot of really fruitful things. So I think there's just a few ways to build trust. And so I'm not surprised to see that reporting good verified data is high among the attendees.
Yeah, Brian, just like something that you mentioned there, which was collaboration, right? And not only like collaboration externally with partners that may be working towards the same things, and then you can work together to help solve the issue. So it's what you start to realize in the ESG industry, it's a smaller industry that is only getting bigger. And I think in general, most of the folks you meet are tracking towards the same end goal, right? Which is to eliminate emissions, offset our emissions, and bring the world closer to that 2-degree alignment. And so, and hopefully better if we can do it right. And we aren't going to be able to do it without that collaboration. Having the data be correct from the beginning is like the very core step. Externally, internally, it helps you make strategic decisions on how you're what you're prioritizing, right? For instance, if we are looking to do some type of power purchase agreement, we need to make sure that our data is very sharp so that we know what we're purchasing. And so we wouldn't just go off of our own process. Again, it would be, we want to have this data verified because it helps justify purchasing decisions that we need to make as a business. So.
Great. And again, this is our topic too, just moving off the data right now. And I think that Chris and Brian have both spoken to this extensively already. Why is verification becoming more important for organizations? It's a huge part of what organizations are dealing with and going through. Derek, you haven't had a chance to touch on this before Chris goes into a little bit more detail. Did you want to did you want to comment on this a little bit?
Yeah, I just acknowledge what Brian was saying about being vulnerable to your stakeholders. I think that's really important. It's kind of like that Brené Brown, her approach to you're being vulnerable. You're opening up engagement more, and I think it's that engagement between companies and customers and investors that is really going to help us all get to where we need to be. And so, not just sharing the good news, but also sharing the not so good news and what you're trying to do about it. In order to, give companies confidence that, what they're putting out there is the right news. And that's really where the third party verification comes into play. That's our big selling point to customers. So yeah, that's the main thing I'd like to add to that.
Great. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris then to talk a little bit more about this before we jump into our third topic or so. We do have about 30 minutes left in today's webinar, and we're going to try to save as much time as possible for the Q&A.
I'll be pretty quick, probably on the closeout here, as we addressed most of this in the polling questions. Thanks for the results. Brian kind of mentioned the overall greenwashing earlier, which is like the huge elephant in the room, I'd say. And again, the verification really helps make sure that you're doing things correctly so that you're not portrayed in that way. And it helps you make your systems better. And we have clear marching orders on how to make our systems better. I'm sure every organization does. Another thing is regulation. And in the UK and the EU specifically right now, where you're required to report on energy and energy efficiency and carbon footprint of your scope 1 and 2 at least. And so again, having this verification shows that we're on the right track in doing so, and it gives us confidence in doing that to those that government regulation, as well as when we're speaking to our leadership teams or the board around what our emissions look like, and then what we're really doing to expand our scope going forward and then reduce what that looks like over time.
Yeah, I'd like to add just one more thing to that along the lines of what you're saying, Chris. I think Chris and Brian could both attest to the fact that the verification process is not just like you hire a verifier and they come in and they look and they give it the stamp of approval or not. It's a very iterative process. It's very rare that we have a client come to us where we don't find things that could be done better or need to be done differently, or the data is not 100% accurate when it first lands with us. So that's where the coming out the other end, I think there's a lot of confidence for clients, and then therefore taking that out to the public. So not always are those things that we come up with through the verification process very large and impactful, but sometimes they are. But the more things that you can button up and tie and feel confident about, the better. So.
Sounds good to me. On to our third topic. What barriers did your organization experience, and how did you overcome them? And I can tell you from the questions that are coming in from our attendees, this is definitely something that they want to hear more about. So Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you to start us off.
Yeah, so many barriers. So I'll say with this, I think just like with sustainability, verification is a journey. And for us, the first hurdle that we encountered was a lack of willingness from our leadership team to want to disclose information. Right? No need to verify data if you're not going to share it. And so that was the starting point. I would say starting out, I coined a term we used internally called iceberg sustainability. We talked about a tiny little peak of something sticking above the water, and we had all these things going on below the surface. And really there wasn't a comfort level from our leadership team that those were meaningful activities or that they were relevant to our customers or our stakeholders. And so I think there was a reluctance to talk about them. And along with that, a reluctance to share any data whatsoever, right? If you don't feel comfortable about the approach, you're never going to feel comfortable sharing the data. And so we prepared a presentation on why we thought we should disclose, how we should be getting data verified, what we should, over time, where we should start and how we should roll it out. And I went into this leadership team meeting, and as usual, it's running behind. And they say, we're running behind. We want to get to this quickly. And I'm feeling like, okay, we're not going to spend any real time on this. And I said, okay, don't worry about the slides. I'll ask you one question, and you answer that. And I said, I go with my friends to Las Vegas for the weekend, and I come home, and my wife says, what'd you do? And I said, I don't want to talk about it. And I walk away, right? And they all kind of laughed. And I said, no, seriously, Ingredion, how much water did you use last year? We don't talk about it. What were your carbon emissions? We didn't say. And I said, I mean, we're guilty by association. And I wrote a number on the board, and I said, this is one of our competitors' water usages last year. Is that a good number or a bad number? And I told them, I can't even tell you. I don't know their operations well enough to answer that question. So it's not about whether or not the number is good. It's about whether or not you're willing to disclose the number and whether or not the number is meaningful. And then is it trending better over time? And so that for us was the first hurdle that we had to get to. That unlocked the willingness to say, okay, let's start sharing information about our performance. And that led to verification. And we continue to improve. We're not great at it. There are plenty of other companies out there you could look at that do a really great job at this. But I think, like a lot of people on the call, probably it's an evolution, and you've got to start somewhere. And I think for us, that's where we had to start.
That's so key. I mean, you kind of hit it right on the head when you said, look, it's all about, are you willing to be transparent? And then what are you doing after the transparency to help reduce that over time, reduce your impact over time? It's so important. I mean, everyone is starting at a different point in their journey. And so you shouldn't fear what you're going to find out. You already made a great analogy, Brian, but it's like not going to the doctor because you fear you're going to find something. It's let's figure out what it is, and then let's take the actions that we need to reduce this over time. And so I think one of our biggest barriers has been more so in the increasing what we're doing, right? Trying to level set like where we're getting data and how to make things better over time. And I'm fortunate that this is something that our leadership team is super sharp on, and something that we're really tracking towards. Again, where we made a commitment to be net zero by 2040, and having alignment throughout the organization, and then having like clear marching orders on how we're going to get there is something that we have developed and are continuing to strengthen. So.
Derek, did you have something you wanted to add before we go on to our next poll question?
Sorry, yeah, I had it on mute. Thanks. I think both Uber and Ingredion are clearly companies who have a pretty well developed ESG sustainability program in place. One of the big barriers we see for a lot of medium or even large organizations that just aren't quite ready yet or don't think they're ready yet is having a program in place internally that is driving ESG and sustainability, and then the resources and the cost to kind of put that kind of network in place internally. So it does take some scaling up in that regard for organizations to make sure they have the right resources in place to then give themselves confidence that what they're going to share with the world is accurate and correct. So that's something I'd just throw out there. But that said, I mean, as we talked about so far along the way here, we're getting to the point where those costs are not unfounded. They really do have a lot of benefits in this market that we're moving into these days.
Thank you for ending us right there. Well, I shouldn't say ending. We're going to move on to our poll question, which I'm sure you can guess is about barriers. So what is your organization's biggest barrier to beginning verification? Funding, lack of technical understanding, lack of data, or resources? And I would say, again, all of these will probably apply, but which one do you think your organization, again, biggest barrier right now? And again, audience members, I promise we will get to some of these questions that are coming in. If we don't get a chance to answer your question during today's event, the question will be directed to the appropriate speaker or all of the speakers. Just make sure that you know that your question will be addressed. Alrighty. All right. Funding, technical resources. Brian, what do you think about this?
Yeah, this is fairly closely aligned to what what I see in my own organization, but resources I think are the biggest issue, at least for us. And all of these are applicable, by the way, to my organization. Obviously, funding. If somebody gave you enough money, you could hire external resources to come in and do everything for you. So I think that's always an issue, but having the resources, one, to make sure that you're collecting the data, having time to actually review the data, and just discuss things through, figuring out how are you going to report, building that strategy. All that comes with availability of resources or finding the right external structure to link to. And that can help ease some of the burden on resources. I know there have been a couple questions in the chat around, what are people looking at, or are there standards that we should be looking at in terms of ESG? I think just earlier this year, TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, surpassed SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, as the most referenced standard by the investment community. And I'll say this, TCFD is really just focused on climate change. What I like about SASB is they actually have a SASB, S-A-S-B, materiality map. And if you put that in a Google search, SASB materiality map, it will take you to their materiality kind of index by industry. So you find your industry, it'll tell you what's most material to that. And I would say that in just an informal polling of my network is about 85% accurate to some of the more time-consuming work that we did in developing our own materiality assessment. So I would say resources is an issue, but if you know the right places to look, you can maybe ease some of the burden on those resources.
Chris,
yeah,
are you kind of aligned there? Yeah.
Totally. I think with you bring up a good point with TCFD and SASB. So the UK just basically announced that it's going to align reporting to TCFD, which is super exciting. So if you are looking for frameworks to use, I would look for what's trending and what the future is going to look like within, because there are a million frameworks out there. There really are, and that is also in the investment industry. Like one gap that the SASB or the ISSB at this point now and TCFD are looking to close, right? It's like we should have one standard that everyone's kind of being rated against. And so I think to help address like the results of this, kind of what I immediately thought was, okay, from a resourcing perspective, I'm sure that a lot of orgs might be going through some type of, okay, like if you're starting this ESG journey, you haven't built these tools yet, or maybe you have started to build these tools. Maybe you'll go hire a consultant to do that, maybe not. But you may be one of one on a team, depending on how large your organization is or how small your organization is. You may be a team of one, and I think you have to really realize that this requires a lot of collaboration across the entire company, because the data points that you're getting touch a million folks, whether it's finance, legal, your physical like workplace team or facilities teams, things like that. And so I think you can very much like expand your resource offering if you look internally to build that internal network, saying, look, you are a part of this core, asking, of course, will you be a part of this core ESG team? And here are the things that we need. And this is how it's helping push this initiative forward, and really showing how it really helps do that to folks is something that we found successful. We certainly have challenges in that resourcing category, and I think having everyone being so collaborative in this space really helps us work through that in a better way.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for sharing that. I got to say, we get a good cross section of different industries and sizes of companies, but one of the traits that makes working with a client much more smooth and gives us a lot more confidence that it's going to be a smooth process is that when we're not just dealing with that one person who's been assigned to take the baton and run with this, that one person there may just be one person at the top, but that they've really established that network internally. For me, I mean, it's really exciting. Our company does a lot of different things, and we focus on different types of certification. ESG, climate, is the one that is across the board within all departments, up and down the hierarchy of an organization. And so the more that the effort has been taken internally to get everybody on board to support this effort, the smoother and more accurate the process is going to be at the end of the day.
All great points. And for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the very last topic, which Derek is going to have, and then we will get into as many questions as possible. So risks, obviously there are huge risks of not being verified. So Derek, why don't you take us down this path?
Yeah, I'll just tee up a few, and it's kind of back to the slide I had in the beginning. First of all, you risk having inaccurate information that you're working with when you're setting goals and targets. And, there's the base year that you're working off of, and then there's like your year-on-year change over time that you're trying to work towards achieving a goal, whether it be 10 or 15 years ahead. And if you're not getting your information and your data verified, it's likely that there's a lot of work being done that's wrong. And so that, I mean, whether or not your stakeholders care, just internally, you're putting a lot of effort into this space, and it's important that you guys are working off of accurate data that you're all confident in. Then there's the lower ratings and scores in NGOs and ratings agencies. There's less engagement that could come out of that with investors and clients and customers, which could then, of course, hit your bottom line. And I think in this day and age, in particular in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of traction in the ESG space. We've seen a lot of weather events, extreme, and it's getting a lot of attention for good reason finally. And so the bottom line, I think, is something that can be sold to top management pretty easily nowadays. So those are the ones I'd like to tee up. I know we're running a little close on time, but it could be good to hear what others have to say on that.
Yeah, I think, Brian, you mentioned TCFD earlier, and I think it's really important to, and this doesn't say like what the risk is, but it helps you identify as your organization what your risks are, and reporting requirements very well should be a line item on that list. But I highly recommend you go through some type of TCFD assessment where it pulls basically every person, every subject matter expert in the company together, and it says, how are you looking at the risks and opportunity, or the risks of climate change, and what opportunities do you have to mitigate those risks to the business? And then in reverse, what is the business's impact on climate change, and the opportunities you have then to reduce that? And so you'll find on there that reporting, and on our first TCFD assessment, it's all more qualitative than quantitative, but it's all around reputation is one of those risks in reporting. And it also trickles down, and we mentioned this earlier, to business decisions. If you find out years later that, hey, we did this wrong, and we purchased something incorrectly to account for it, well, then that's something that you have to kind of work out going forward. And so helping like mitigate that from happening and getting verified just, again, allows you to give an extra stamp of approval on, okay, I'm doing this right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. Not only is there the risk and what Derek said of being assessed incorrectly, so you might not get the preferential stock rating that drives up stock price or whatever, but just internally, like Chris was saying, I think there's a risk of making bad business decisions. I mean, if somebody's not looking at the data that we put into our system that's informing our water and our carbon emission reports that we're rolling up, we run the risk of investing capital somewhere where we could have allocated it, more effectively somewhere else. And so I think that's one of the values of getting validation or getting verified is just making sure that you've got good data to make decisions from.
Which is obviously incredibly crucial to this whole process. We are going to jump into some questions now. We have about 10 minutes until we reach the top of the hour. So let's just start with verification in general. If a company is starting at the very beginning, and this is kind of a two-part question, it's such an overwhelming process, and it's such an overwhelming series of tasks, I think, for some organizations who are just starting this. So what advice do you have for those companies? And then if you had to do your verification process over again, what would you change? So, Chris, do you want to take this one, and then we'll get Brian's thoughts as well? Yeah.
Yeah, if you're at the beginning of your journey, do a materiality assessment, do it of the company as a whole and in all things ESG, and then do an assessment of the E portion, because this is just, we're talking about environmental and climate change reporting here. Then do an assessment of the E portion and see what scopes are material to your business, and then understand, are we collecting any data in that sense? How can we begin collecting this data? What can we do to understand this better? Then you start to set some goals and some strategies around how you want to do things better going forward. And so I would just very much, you just have an idea. You need to understand like what's materially impacting our business, and let's put our efforts towards that. Climate change was one of our number one material issues. And so again, it helps set structure for how you do things and what you prioritize, because you may start your program and there's a million things you can do. You can do here, you can do there. What's water, which is super important for Brian, while it is a material issue for Uber, it isn't the most material issue as much as emissions are, right? And so I think that you start to understand like, okay, we need to put more resources towards here and towards there. And then once those programs get more mature, then you can focus on other things.
Yeah, I would echo what Chris just said. I think the materiality assessment is the exact right place to start. Figure out what's most important to your organization. And then again, like he said, start small. I think that was one thing, if I went back, I would do over. We said, oh, all these things are, relevant to sustainability. So we have to have programs on all these things. I think we would have said, okay, we're not going to focus on these right now. We're going to work them in over time. Let's do these 3 things right. That's what I would do if I was starting from scratch, is figure out what's most important to the business, figure out what 3 things, 2 or 3 things do we want to do absolutely right, get the data, get it verified, make sure that you're building action plans around that, and then figure out what are the value drivers for those areas for sustainability for your business, right? So if you're talking about climate change, I look at 3 value drivers for our company, right? One is cost control. If I reduce, utilities, I'm reducing cost. I look at risk mitigation. How am I taking risk out of my operations or my supply chain? And then brand enhancement. Is there a value that's intangible to our brand by doing some of these things? And when I started speaking the value driver language back to the business leaders, we got a lot more traction on doing some of these things.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me one bit. Derek, from your perspective, when you start working with clients who are new to this, what do you take from those initial meetings?
Yeah, I think that ensuring that, well, the message I'm hearing from them is that, when they're new to this, they're really excited to get started, I got to say. And that's really, I do like working with first-time reporters with that in mind. Sometimes they're a little nervous, but one of the things we try and do is, set aside that nervousness by letting them know, like what I said earlier, it really is an iterative process. We're not just here to be a bad cop and tell you that you don't pass and issue a ticket or anything. Our goal is to get you to the state where you can, have a positive opinion at the end of the day. And by and large, that happens 99% of the time, first time through. Usually not without much work to get there, like I said. So a lot of clients are exciting going into it and don't know what to expect. So I'd like to share that with all of the the attendees here that it's not something to be too nervous about. Understanding what we've talked about earlier, all organizations come at this with a different set of resources and ability to put in the time to get things really buttoned up. But yeah, it's a journey that all clients are on, and like Brian just said, starting small and then expanding out from there, and really what both Chris and Brian said, focusing on the material issues to your organization will help you not only hone in on what you need to do, but get top management on board and have the rest of the organization supporting your efforts.
Great. And again, everybody has to start somewhere. So start small and then just keep moving up. This is a question that has come in quite a few times, and Chris mentioned it earlier, talking about the standards, how it would be great to just have one all-encompassing standard that every company would use, as opposed to the thousands, millions of different standards that companies could reference. So do you think that there's going to be one specific standard going forward? I mean, how realistic is that to have within the next 3 to 5 years or sooner? And is there one that's out there right now that you feel is going to be that standard?
Yeah, I'll tee this one up for us. Like I mentioned earlier, our company certifies to all kinds of different standards, and whether it be ISO 14001, 9000, aerospace, within this space of ESG, carbon, sustainability, this is the part of our business, and the thing that our customers are all challenged with is the fact that there's just so many standards out there. Things are progressing towards the more financial standards, like we've been talking about along the lines here, the TCFD, SASB, GRI is in there from the broad sustainability perspective. There's a lot of qualitative information in those, and the actual data is in there as well, of course. But when it comes to the idea of starting small and working your way to build it out, by and large, most of our clients start with the GHG protocol. It's really well put together in regards to explaining things. It's got a lot of narrative in it. It has shalls and should statements, which help you determine what you actually need to do, the shalls, and what are good things to consider doing, being the shoulds. But it also has a lot of explanation to help you wrap your head around all the different concepts when it comes to carbon reporting. And then also the GHG protocol has other standards. Well, it has a suite of standards. So, there's the corporate reporting standard for Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, but then it's also got a separate standard for Scope 2 specific that they rolled out 6-7 years ago now, which hones in on more detail on Scope 2 reporting. And then it's also got another standard for Scope 3, and it's got some industry-specific ones as well for agriculture and stuff. I know they have a working group going on right now to help kind of get to the nitty-gritty clarification on agricultural reporting when it comes to carbon sequestration and stuff. So, but we work with clients who are reporting to all different kinds of standards, including their own internal methodologies, and we can verify it all when it comes to getting a standard that's helpful. Those are the ones that I was mentioning a second ago.
Great, and I know we're at the top of the hour, but I would love to get Chris and Brian's take on this topic before we close up. So Brian, you want to start and then hand it over to Chris?
Yeah, I don't think that we're likely to see any one standard come out in the next, 3 to 5 years. And the reason I say that is because we're seeing these consumer product goods companies seeing double-digit growth with sustainable brands. And along with that is the need to keep differentiating. And so I don't think there's as strong of a driver to get everybody on the same standard, even though that would probably help everybody move along farther, faster. So what I would say is, do your benchmarking, look at your industry, look at your customers, look at companies you idolize, figure out what standards they're using, and then pick what you think is most relevant to your organization. And once you've picked that, you now have a position of strength to have a conversation with your stakeholders around. We have a sustainable agriculture program that we've adopted. It's one most used by the food and beverage industry, but it's not one that every single one of our customers is aligned with. And so when they come to us and say, well, we want something different, it's a commercial discussion, not a sustainability or a risk discussion. And so we can, I don't ever tell anybody no, but they may have to pay if they want something different. And then we find out how important is it really to them. But I would say just picking, right? Don't go years without picking, because you'll be like a cork in a stormy ocean. You'll just, bob and weave whichever way the winds or the oceans go. Pick something, pick it based on research and benchmarking, but pick and use that as a starting point.
Yeah, Brian, you started to hint at this, but just like being strategic in picking, like take your top 10 or top 25 investors, ask them, what standard do you most, what standard do you make decisions based off of? I mean, there's a very easy start, right? And so I think the International Sustainability Standards Board was just created recently. We kind of chatted about this earlier. I think one of their goals, and I mean, a lot of frameworks, their goals are to be the one framework, but their goal is to create more of a global framework for reporting. To Brian's point, I don't know like how soon that might happen, or because everyone's just different, and so it'll be interesting to see. But aligning to things like TCFD or SASB are great because they're also other frameworks pull from those frameworks as well. And as Brian mentioned earlier, there is a materiality portion in SASB that you can go to, and so sometimes you may teeter between two different industries, right? Like we do, and so it's just have a clear understanding and make a good guess, and then as long as you're tracking also towards CDP, it's a great overall tool. And it gives good like baseline metrics on how to on what you're looking to report against. I tried to go this whole time without getting a Slack message, and I did. So there we go.
Well, as I'm closing up, I can tell there's a delivery person, so I'm sure my dogs are going to start barking shortly coming up here. So I do want to thank everybody who was able to be on live with us. This entire event will be available on demand to go back and watch. I'm pretty sure we could do an hour or two discussion of just a full Q&A on this topic, and we wouldn't run out of questions. So I do want to thank the team at the teams at Ingredion, LRQA, and of course Uber for all the work that you put into the presentation. I've greatly enjoyed working with the entire team on this event, and hopefully we'll be able to work together soon. And to that regard, this is the first webinar in the sustainability series. So From Carbon to ESG is the next webinar from LRQA, and that's going to be on February 16th. That web page, or I should say the landing page, should be up shortly. If you would like to register for that event, please send me a message and I will make sure that you get the information as soon as it goes live. But again, thank you to Chris and Derek and Brian for today's discussion. And that concludes today's webinar. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.